anyone that's trying to convince someone to buy their product might be approaching it in the wrong way. I think, as salespeople, whether you're a sales leader, a marketer, anything that's related to top line, growing market share, it's really around what problem are we solving, and how do we put a spotlight on the pain? Because sometimes customers grow numb to the pain. I mean, we might work in sales, but we're also operators within a business, right? So we have folks that are selling to us. I have folks that reach out to me all the time saying, "Hey, do you need this? Or can I position this with you? Or can you tell me about that?" That doesn't get my attention. But if someone comes to me and says, "Hey, Chase, I've got a way that I can help your team hit their number," I don't even need to know what you're talking about. You've got my attention at that point. Because as a revenue leader, that's front and center. So I think anyone that's in the space, regardless of what your product or service or solution is, it really has to be predicated on what are you trying to solve for. But what's different over in the current set of conditions that we're in is even that's not enough. It's not enough just to highlight, here's the pain and here's what I can do to solve for it. Now we have to take it a step further and say, and oh, by the way, how do we make sure that your CFO sees value in what we're positioning from a solution standpoint? If you look at the bull market that we've been in, it's been going on for so many years. It's been going on for a decade plus. There's a lot of folks that have gotten into sales during that time that have never sold under these conditions before. There's also a lot of sales leaders that are leading through a turbulent economy for the very first time. And so it's actually ushering in a bit of a fascinating conversation of who are the folks that can adapt and learn quickly. And those are the ones that will win. And who are those that will continue with the same playbook, the same set of parameters to try and position their solutions and capture market share. And those are the folks that ultimately will lose, during these times. So, it's interesting times for sure. And I do think that those that are adapting and moving quickly on that front will be the winners in the end.
The example that you use, right? Like as a revenue leader, help me how to help my team meet the numbers. Or what kind of approach have you seen that works here in getting to that specificity?
Broadly, the higher you are selling into the organization, the more it needs to be a data-based financial conversation. The higher you get within the organization, executives tend to be less concerned with the how. That will come into play. And in many cases, they probably have teams that can vet that and make sure it's the right how, if you will, for the organization. But what they really want to know is, show me the financial impact, right? And so, for me, if someone comes to the table and says, let me show you how I've helped X amount of my clients reach 120% of their annual growth target. And oh, by the way, X amount of the reps that got there, 80% of the reps were able to hit their number. That's interesting, right? It's quantifiable. It's not subjective. It's not a vanity pain that they're solving at that point. And I think this is the broader narrative for anyone out there, regardless of whether you're selling software or what have you. Your proposal is going to go to the CFO. It's guaranteed. Depends on the size of the organization, but in most cases, it's either going to go to the finance team at some point or it's going to go to the CFO. If you haven't done your due diligence to capture financial impact, if you haven't found a champion within the organization that can say, hey, Sumit, this is how my finance team or CFO is going to look at this particular proposal. And here's the success criteria financially, or here's how they evaluate cost. If you haven't gotten to that level of granularity, you're going to have a really hard time in this economy. And so what I'm seeing is the sales teams and sales leaders that double down on helping their teams increase their financial acumen and tying numbers to it. And they don't lead with the mousetrap, so to speak. They lead with the outcome, which these are not new concepts, by the way, but in these conditions, it's make or break, right? Those are the folks that really get through those gatekeepers.
Sure.
And I would say even personally from that standpoint, folks that reach out to me, those are the ones that get my attention, and we typically have a conversation.
For example, right? So what are
Yeah.
some behaviors or new processes, that a seller or a selling team can adapt to get to this due diligence every single time?
Curiosity will get you really far in sales. Okay. The best sellers that I've ever worked with, they are genuinely curious about their customer's business. They don't go in and just start talking about all the capabilities of what they do, or, let me tell you about my company. They spend an enormous amount of time just getting the person on the other side of the table or the video uh, to educate them on the business. So that's number one. Just promoting that behavior. If you're a revenue leader, sales leader, what have you, encouraging that curiosity and trying to hire folks that fit within that. That's a hiring practice. That's something that you do day one when you're interviewing folks, making sure that they have that. I don't know that you can really make someone be curious about someone else, so you definitely have to make sure you're hiring for that, and that's a core
Yeah.
element in the talent process. So that's number one. Um, Number two is train your folks on financial acumen. Uh, Most salespeople that I've encountered in my career don't know how to read a balance sheet.
Mm.
Okay, they've never had to, right? Um, there are some great trainers that are out there that can teach your teams how to do this. There's great e-learnings. I remember in the previous economic downturn, uh, we had that situation. At the time I was leading go-to-market for a global SaaS company, and overwhelmingly we knew that our product was not going to get through, and we weren't going to close business and drive the growth targets that we needed unless we had a better financial story to tell. And so we did a few things. We educated folks on how to go to a financial statement and make sense of that and ask questions that tie back to the financial criteria. But one thing that I love that was actually a lot of fun for us is we brought in our CFO, and we had him present to us at sales kickoff. And I remember going to him saying, listen, I'm going to ask you to do something that you may not want to do, but I need you to run a session for all the sales folks. And it's basically opening up the CFO mind to the sales folks. How do you look at cost? How do you evaluate investments? What is a make or break for you, right? You're not concerned so much with the product, but you want to make sure that it drives the right financial outcomes. So help us to understand what that is. And it was great. It really bridged the gap between the CFO and our sales teams. And I think he may have been a little nervous to probably get peppered with questions from sales. And I think sales was a little intimidated too to be talking to the CFO. So you almost had, you know, opposing forces talking to one another. But by the end of it, I think everyone walked away with a better understanding of how those audiences work. And
True.
so we immediately started to implement certain cadences around understanding our clients' financial scorecard. And that's a function of doing really, really good research on the front end, which everything is online. You can find almost anything you need. But then asking good questions during discovery and making some of those questions aligned to, hey, how do you evaluate investments? Do you understand the success criteria for the CFO? It's a great way also to find out if the individual you're speaking with is someone who can ultimately get your deal across the finish line. Because if they can answer those questions, then you're talking to a fairly seasoned executive who's got probably the juice to help you get a deal done. And if they can't answer that, then no problem. But you've still got some work to do within that process. So I think coaching, I think making it a priority. I would definitely get to know your CFO. Everyone's got a CFO or someone that fits that role within their company. Go talk to them. They are making these decisions every day, and they can definitely teach you what it takes to get through that filter, and you'll be more successful as a result.
Do you think some of the qualification or discovery frameworks need to be updated, and enablement has to be done around them to, get the teams to really internalize this thought process?
You're going to have to train, regardless of the size of the organization, you're going to have to do some formal training that sets the baseline. I've worked with sales professionals that come from finance, and they know more than I do about it, right? I'm not claiming to know a lot about it. I know enough to be dangerous on it because I've led P&Ls and all that stuff, so it kind of gave me that exposure. But I've worked with folks that have been in finance, and they're great at it, and I love bringing them in because they're just so good with that conversation. But then you're going to have other folks that they've never been exposed to it. They just don't have the exposure to it. So how do you take a sales organization with all these different personalities, all these different backgrounds, and how do you create a baseline? You're going to have to train them, and you really have to make it professionalized. I recommend having some type of e-learning module. There's some great ones that are out there, by the way, right now. E-learning modules where you can track and see, have all your folks finish this? How are they scoring on it? You want to have a degree of compliance. So I think that's a good starting point for a lot of organizations. Like I said before, I've also used third-party trainers that have come in that have said, hey, look, here's a methodology that'll really help you, and it's simple. It's good from a time and territory perspective, so you can strike a balance there. So that's another way of doing it. But as sales leaders, you have to be committed to the methodology. You have to truly embrace it and make it just as much a part of your selling ethos if you want your team to do it. Because here's what's going to happen. The really good sellers on your team that have been doing this a long time, they're most likely going to come to you and say something to the effect of, hey, Sumit, I hear you and I recognize the importance. I'm just not good at this. I'd like for you to get on there and show me how it's done. Let me follow your lead, coach me a little bit. I will learn anything if it helps me to hit my number, but I'm just not that good at it right now. And so here as the leader of the team or the organization, all eyes are on you to step up and walk the walk, right? So I think it's two-pronged. It's formal training. I think e-learnings are great right now, especially with work from home. But make it a part of your sales DNA and lead from the front. If you want folks to do it, lead from the front. Let them see the reaction of a customer executive to how you speak about the solution from a financial perspective, and they will all get on board, has been my experience. It's undeniably effective when folks see that reaction.
What you're saying now is it's time to get back in and show the team how to, change track, change behaviors.
It's an easy trap to fall into. I mean, depending on your role and how your organization is structured, if you are not intentional about being customer facing as an executive, there are a lot of demands for your time. You can spend weeks, months, hopefully not years, but I'm sure there's folks out there that could say it's been years since they've met with a customer. If you are not customer centric, the higher you get in the organization, it becomes much more difficult, I think, to, or it becomes, you can fall into the trap of being more internally focused and less externally focused. And so, again, that just comes down to personality, your business ethos, if you will. But bring folks to the table. One of the best things that I've seen in my career is when a CEO brings the sales rep to the same meeting. And the takeaway from the rep is, wow, that was a completely different conversation than I've ever had. Now, look, it's easy when CEO's in your title, right? Because it allows you to talk about some different things. You have a different perspective of the business, the strategy, all that is there. But that exposure is so valuable to the team that even if you're not a CEO, just an executive in general, bring the frontline salespeople to your meetings. Let them get a feel for how executives speak to one another. What are the questions that come up? Because in doing so, you are teaching your team how to be executive centric. And to tie that back to the original talking point of 2023 and the economic conditions and everything that's changing, that's just one other way to really level up and beat the competition, I think.
What's your perspective on why is it so hard for the sales team or to get the sales team to adapt to a new thing? Is it something to do with, like how it is being approached? Is it something to do with how much time they have? Like what's happening there?
it's interesting. I've never been a part of an organization where a new process gets rolled out and the salespeople say, "Hooray! I've got process." Even if it's good for them, right? So look, I think it's always a balancing act. Process has its place. As companies grow and as you're trying to achieve scale, you have to have some process. You just can't get away from it. I think the challenge becomes when it's process for the sake of process. And where I've seen process work really, really well in helping companies to be faster, better, scale more effectively, drive better outcomes from a top line perspective, or if you're really focused on financial efficiency, you might be looking at process to help with that too, to govern different behaviors. Regardless of what your goal is with the process, when there's collaboration between sales and revenue leadership, and whoever the team is that's creating that process, if it's RevOps or it's finance or whoever, provided there is healthy collaboration and dialogue on the front end, that's typically when a good process comes about. Because ideally, both folks are coming to the table with perspectives that are totally valid, right? Processes aim to achieve the things that I just mentioned, and sales says, hey, but by the way, I've got a number to hit, right? And my time, every time I spend an hour doing something internal, that potentially takes me away from a customer-facing activity that could drive sales and maybe drive it in this month or this quarter or this year. So again, there's always going to be resistance on that. I don't think anyone should go into it looking for that to be the outcome, because I don't think you'll find it. But if you want to find the right balance that helps the organization, have a conversation on the front end between the stakeholders. Try to understand each other's perspective. If you're a sales leader, hey, why are you implementing this process? Like, is there a pain? Is there an issue? Is there something we're trying to solve for within the organization? Can it be solved for without a process? Okay, if it can't, let's put a process into place. But then from the other side of the table, trying to understand what is the downstream impact on sales. Okay, so we put this process in place and we solve for an issue over here. But is there a cost? And you have to know what the cost is to weigh it out to say, does the cost justify the gain with the process that you're implementing? If you do those things, typically I think you can get 80% of the way. But again, there's always going to be folks that are a little bit more process oriented and they go to process first. And there's also going to be folks that say, hey, forget your process, I do this by gut feel. And that's the other end of the extreme. And I think the middle ground is where great things come to life.
To put that process in right perspective, the teams have to be shown right from the top how to affect it into their daily motions, and doing that holistically is what is going to drive change, which will enable the teams to sell effectively in these current times, basically.
Right. Yeah, and I'll give you a quick example here. I was part of a team once that we were trying to, this was some years ago, we were trying to get better around some of our discounting controls. It was a little bit all over the map, getting a little bit chaotic. So, how do you implement a process for controlling discounts that doesn't slow down the sales team? Because you got to respond to customers quickly, so it's a balancing act. Sales looked at it as an unnecessary process. RevOps looked at it as, hey, we're aligning with the CFO who needs this. Both parties were right? Both parties were right. So how do we make this work? There was so much friction. I mean, everyone was just, they were so upset at one another. So we brought folks together. And when we went through that simple process of explaining and understanding, everyone walked away with a better grasp of, oh, now I get it. Context is everything. The irony here is the way that we try to problem solve with our clients to understand the pain, to perform discovery, and work through the different stakeholders and ultimately align on a path forward that solves for whatever their issue might be. we always make the mistake, or we often make the mistake within our own companies sometimes of not following that same playbook, right? Sales is not just selling to external audiences. Our number one customer is often the individuals who we work with,
Hmm.
right? How do you get something done if you don't understand their success criteria? What does it mean to them? Who do they have to go to for approvals? Why are they resistant to change? Sounds awfully familiar if you work in sales, because those are all the same elements that exist when we're working with an external audience. So it's a simple playbook, I think, of being curious, um, and opening the door for discussion and helping people to understand and aligning on the path forward. And then you problem solve and you execute. That's ultimately what I think it boils down to.
What are some areas you think the teams can start getting help from the applications of AI for their workflows?
So AI is super exciting right now. I mean, it's without a doubt one of the greatest disruptive moments I think most of us will probably ever experience in our lifetime. I say that until something else comes out, and then I'll probably, eat my words. But no, it's super exciting. All the different use cases and the way it's fostered a startup community and ecosystem. I mean, there are so many awesome companies that have been built overnight, it seems like, that are solving for problems that no one was even thinking about, right? Um, Now, the downside is people throw around AI way too loosely. And I think that for a period of time is going to create a lot of market confusion. It already is. And in some cases, it might put a bad taste in someone's mouth because someone told them, hey, AI, and this is easy and turnkey. Sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. It just depends on the solution and the use case. From a sales perspective, I love anything that automates for my team. If you come to me and say, Chase, I can give your team back uh, 3 hours per week just by taking something off their plate, I got to know what it is. From that standpoint, I see a lot of really interesting tech. I haven't used too many yet, so I'm not going to say that I've adopted them and I can speak to the outcomes, but I'm very interested right now in a lot of the new technology that's emerging. It might be automating or adding in, or augmenting even forecasting, so we can increase predictability in our business, right? I'm a forecasting geek. So when I see something along those lines, I'm like, oh, I got to know what this is about. So I love how AI is being implemented and starting to drive impact, it would seem, on the forecasting front. Um, Quoting, creating proposals, obviously, that's a huge opportunity. Reps across industries spend far too much time uh, building quotes, having to go through many different layers within the organization to create something that should be fairly easy to do, right? Um, and many companies create quotes that may not be that easy to understand. They may be a little bit complex. Maybe they're not conveying the messaging that well. Huge room for improvement, especially. And I know a lot of sales is virtual these days, but folks are still traveling, right? And in fact, I would say, the travel creates its own issue when you're looking for an efficiency gain that AI can provide you, whether it's quoting or forecasting or data entry of some sort, or just scheduling meetings. There's all kinds of great tools that are out there that are shifting that. But I would say in the virtual setting, folks are taking so many more meetings. It is just boom, 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 going through meetings throughout the day. How do you get to the administrative side of sales? It is not all customer facing. And so again, it's almost overwhelming the amount of tools that are out there that are being offered today that can take some of this off the rep's plate. I'm just now getting exposure to some of them, and so I'm figuring this out as a sales leader of how much of this will be a long-term technology versus, okay, we've deployed 4 or 5 different tools. Maybe there's 3 or 2 or 1 that we really, really depend on. So I think we'll see that play
Sure.
itself out over time. But it's exciting for sure, because if you can give my team more time in front of customers, they're happy, I'm happy, the company's happy, and sales are probably going up, hopefully.
Potentially, right? Like one framing for AI is what is giving my team more time to be curious, or taking things off their plate so they have more time for these things potentially.
Earlier view of AI is, oh, it's meant to replace people. Look, yes, there are businesses that are leveraging in that way. However, overwhelmingly, when I speak with customers and clients at some of the biggest enterprises, could be in financial services, could be travel, hospitality, you name it, across the board, retail even. It's not about replacing people, it's about augmentation. How do you augment your workforce to make them better, right? And so there's a strategic advantage that comes along with this, regardless of what level you're at in the organization and where your focus might be. Certainly there's cost containment. You know, now I don't have to hire as many people, but I can actually get more work done. I can cover
Yeah.
more ground. My sales force can get to more customers, even though I didn't have to make a material increase in my overhead to get there.
Yeah.
That's real scale. So businesses large and small, you know, AI is not a Fortune 500 phenomenon. Okay. There are many mid-market and even SMB businesses right now that are leveraging AI
Yeah.
to get the efficiency gain. But, you know, I would just encourage, you know, folks that are out there thinking about this, if you're new to it, it's all about augmentation. How do you augment your people so you get that force multiplier effect? And when you do that, and if you have the right use cases in mind when you start, I think you'll be really pleased with the outcome. And I think in the long run, it's going to create tremendous economic prosperity for folks, you know, provided we are responsible with it. And I think in the long run, it's going to create tremendous economic prosperity for folks, you know, provided we are responsible with it.
On that exciting note, Chase, thank you so much for a very interesting conversation.
Yeah, man. Thanks a lot. Good
And
chatting with
best of
you.
luck for the bumper close of the quarter or the year, I guess.
Thanks. Thanks. Yeah, we got a couple deals to pull in still.